Hey Reddit, my name's David, and until a few days ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. My wife, Emma, and I have been together for 10 years, married for 7. We didn't have kids, but we always said we were waiting for the right time. I thought we were happy. Or at least, I thought she was happy. It started last Saturday. Emma told me she had a surprise planned for us. She said she wanted to go out for a fancy dinner and that I should meet her at this new, upscale restaurant downtown. It's our date night, she said with her usual bright smile. I felt a pang of guilt. I'd been so buried in work lately that I hadn't taken her out in weeks. Maybe this was her way of reigniting the spark. I arrived at the restaurant early, nervous but excited. It was one of those places with dim lighting, candles on every table, and a violinist serenading diners. I couldn't help but smile as I imagined Emma walking in, her dress swaying as she approached. I thought about how lucky I was to have someone like her. But she didn't show up on time. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I texted her, but she didn't reply. I started to worry. Maybe something had happened? Traffic? An accident? My mind raced through every possibility except the one that was about to hit me like a truck. Then I saw her. She walked in wearing a stunning red dress I'd never seen before. Her hair was perfectly done, and her smile was radiant. Only, it wasn't for me. She wasn't alone. Behind her, holding her hand, was a man I didn't recognize. Tall, confident, and dressed like he just walked off the cover of GQ. My heart dropped into my stomach. I froze in my seat as they were led to a table just a few feet away from mine. Emma didn't notice me at first, too engrossed in her conversation with him. She laughed, a light, carefree laugh I hadn't heard in months. It was like I was invisible. I sat there, paralyzed, watching them sip wine and lean into each other like they were the only two people in the room. My mind was spinning. Was this some kind of misunderstanding? A cruel joke? But then I saw it. The way her fingers brushed against his arm, the way she looked at him. I knew that look. It was the same look she used to give me. I don't know what possessed me, but I waved over a waiter. My voice was shaking as I handed him my wedding ring and whispered, "Take this to the woman in the red dress. Tell her it's from her husband." The waiter gave me a strange look, but didn't ask questions. I watched from behind my menu as he walked over to their table. Emma's back was to me, so she didn't see me watching. The waiter placed the ring in front of her and said something. I couldn't hear what, but her reaction said it all. Her face went pale, and her hands flew to her mouth. She turned her head slightly, scanning the restaurant, and that's when her eyes locked on mine. For a second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, but then her expression changed. Anger. No, fury. Like I was the one who'd betrayed her. The man sitting with her looked confused, his gaze darting between Emma and the ring. He asked her something, and she shook her head frantically, grabbing her purse and standing up. She started toward me, her heels clicking against the floor, her face a mix of panic and rage. I stayed seated, my heart pounding as she approached. Everyone in the restaurant was staring now, their hushed whispers filling the room. Emma stopped in front of me, her fists clenched at her sides. "What the hell are you doing here, David?" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's your friend?" Her eyes darted around the room, aware of the audience we were gathering. "This is not the time or place for this," she said through gritted teeth. "Seems like the perfect place to me," I said, standing up. "You invited me here, didn't you?" She blinked, caught off guard, and I saw the realization dawn on her face. She hadn't expected me to show up. This dinner wasn't meant for me, it was meant for him. But I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Not this time. Emma stared at me, her face a mixture of fury and panic. She was clearly scrambling for a way to regain control of the situation, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. Not this time. The whispers in the restaurant grew louder as people realized they were witnessing some kind of marital meltdown. I could see the waiter who had delivered the ring standing off to the side, looking deeply uncomfortable. "David," Emma began, her voice low and sharp, "you need to leave. Now." I crossed my arms and tilted my head, feigning confusion. "Leave? Why would I leave? You invited me here, remember?" Her lover, let's call him Mr. Perfect Hair, finally stood up from their table. He was clearly trying to piece together what was happening, but his confusion only fueled my anger. "Is this your husband?" he asked Emma, his voice cautious. She shot him a glare that could melt steel. "Sit down, Jason," she snapped. "So, his name was Jason. Good to know." "Yeah, Jason," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Why don't you sit down? This is a private conversation between a wife and her husband." Jason hesitated, glancing between Emma and me. I could tell he wasn't sure whether to stay or flee, but before he could decide, Emma turned back to me. "David, this is ridiculous," she hissed. "You're embarrassing both of us." "Oh, I'm embarrassing us?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You're the one having a romantic dinner with another man while your husband sits at home, thinking you're working late or out with friends." The restaurant was dead silent now. I could feel every pair of eyes on us, but I didn't care. If Emma wanted to play the part of the wrong party, I was going to rip that facade to shreds in front of everyone. Emma's face flushed red, and she took a step closer to me, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You're acting like a child," she spat. "We'll talk about this at home." I laughed bitterly. "Home? You mean the place where I've been sitting alone for weeks while you sneak around with him?" I jabbed a finger in Jason's direction, and he visibly flinched. "No, Emma. We're going to talk about this right now. And if you don't want to, maybe Jason here can explain what the hell is going on." Jason looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "Look, man," he stammered, raising his hands in surrender. "I didn't know she was married, okay? She told me you two were separated." My stomach twisted at his words, but I forced myself to stay composed. "Separated?" I repeated, turning back to Emma. "Is that what you've been telling people? That we're separated?" Her lips tightened, and I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to come up with a response. "It's complicated," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned in closer, my voice cold. "Then why don't you uncomplicate it for me, Emma? Go ahead. Explain. I'm all ears." She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, Jason made the mistake of trying to chime in again. "Look, I didn't mean to get involved in this," he said nervously. "I didn't know." I cut him off with a glare. "Jason, with all due respect, shut up. You've done enough." He backed off, raising his hands again as if to say, "I'm out." Emma, meanwhile, looked like she was about to explode. "David," she said through gritted teeth, "this is not the time or place." "No, Emma," I said, my voice firm. "The time was when you decided to lie to me. The place was every single moment you chose to betray me. Now, you don't get to dictate anything." At that moment, I realized just how much I'd been holding back over the years. I'd always been the nice guy, the one who avoided conflict and let things slide for the sake of peace. But not tonight. Tonight, I was done being the doormat. Emma must have sensed the shift in me because her tone suddenly changed. "David," she said softly, almost pleading, "please, let's go somewhere private and talk." Her attempt at damage control was almost laughable. "Private?" I repeated, my voice filled with mock surprise. "Why? So you can feed me more lies without an audience?" "Sorry, but I think I've heard enough." I turned to leave, but then an idea struck me. I walked back to the waiter, who was still lingering nearby, and pulled out my wallet. "I'd like to pay for their dinner," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, nodding toward Emma and Jason. "Consider it a farewell gift." The waiter looked unsure, but he took my card anyway. I turned back to Emma one last time. "Enjoy your meal," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "It'll be the last thing you enjoy on my dime." With that, I walked out of the restaurant, my heart pounding in my chest. But as the cool night air hit my face, I realized this was far from over. Emma's betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was a calculated decision, and I was going to find out just how deep it went. When I got home, I didn't know what to do with myself. My hands were trembling, my head spinning with questions that had no answers. I couldn't sit still. Every second felt like an eternity. I stared at my phone, half expecting Emma to call or text, but there was nothing, just silence. Around midnight, I finally heard her car pull into the driveway. My stomach churned as I listened to her heels click against the pavement, then the sound of the key turning in the lock. She walked in and froze when she saw me sitting on the couch, still in my jacket. Her makeup was smudged, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years in a few hours. "We need to talk," she said cautiously, setting her purse down. "No kidding," I shot back. "But first, let me ask you something. How long has this been going on?" Emma hesitated, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. "It's not what you think," she said finally, which almost made me laugh. The nerve of her to start with that cliché. "Then why don't you tell me what it is, Emma?" I said, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife of 7 years has been sneaking around behind my back." She crossed her arms defensively, her face hardening. "You're not perfect either, David. You've been so distant lately, so wrapped up in work." Don't," I interrupted, pointing a finger at her. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. You could have done literally anything other than this." Her expression flickered for a moment. Regret, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "It was a mistake," she said quietly. "A stupid, meaningless mistake." I leaned back, letting out a bitter laugh. "A mistake? You don't accidentally end up in a restaurant with another man, Emma. You planned this. You lied to me. Don't insult my intelligence." The room was silent for a moment, the tension so thick it felt like I could choke on it. Finally, Emma sat down across from me, her shoulders slumping. "Jason doesn't mean anything to me," she said. "It was just an escape. I don't even know why I did it." Her words felt like a slap in the face. An escape? From what? From me? From our life? I didn't know whether to feel furious or pathetic. "So what now?" I asked, my voice cold. "Do you expect me to just forgive you? Pretend this never happened?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I want, David." Her honesty, as painful as it was, hit me harder than anything else. She didn't know what she wanted. And in that moment, I realized I didn't either. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Emma went to bed eventually, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, trying to figure out how the hell my life had unraveled so quickly. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Emma stayed in the bedroom while I brewed a pot of coffee, my mind racing. I couldn't let this go. I needed answers. If she thought I was going to sit back and let her sweep this under the rug, she had another thing coming. I pulled out my laptop and started digging. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but I had to start somewhere. Emma wasn't the most tech-savvy person, so I figured her email or social media might reveal something. Sure enough, it didn't take long to find the first crack in her story. Her email was linked to a hidden cloud account, one she clearly thought I'd never find. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. There were dozens of messages between her and Jason, going back months. Some were casual, "Can't wait to see you tonight," but others were far more incriminating. Photos, videos, even hotel receipts. My heart raced as I scrolled through the evidence, each new discovery hitting me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some meaningless mistake. This was an affair, a full-blown, calculated betrayal. She'd been meeting him during work hours, lying to me about girls' nights, and even using my credit card to pay for their little rendezvous. The audacity of it all made my blood boil. I printed out everything. Every email, every receipt, every piece of damning evidence. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I needed to have it all laid out in front of me. There was no way she could talk her way out of this. By the time Emma finally came downstairs, I was sitting at the dining table, the stack of papers in front of me. She froze when she saw me, her eyes darting to the documents. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice wary. "Care to explain?" I said, pushing the pile toward her. Her face went pale as she sifted through the pages, her hands trembling. "David, she started, but her voice trailed off. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I said, my voice shaking. "You're sorry? Do you even realize what you've done? You didn't just cheat on me, Emma. You destroyed everything we built. You lied to me. You stole from me." Her tears started to fall, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't say anything," I snapped. "Just answer me this. Why? Why him? Why now?" She looked away, wiping her eyes. I don't know, she said. I guess I felt trapped. Like our marriage had become routine. Jason made me feel alive again. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Routine. Trapped. Was that all I was to her? Just some boring, predictable fixture in her life? Alive? I said, my voice rising. And what about me, Emma? Did you ever think about what this would do to me? Or was I just part of the routine you needed to escape from? She didn't answer, just sat there, staring at the floor. The silence was deafening. I can't do this, I finally said, standing up. I need some air. I grabbed my keys and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get away from her. From the lies. From everything. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind kept replaying her words. Routine. Trapped. Alive. Was our marriage really that broken? Had I missed the signs? Or was this just who she really was? Someone who would throw everything away for a fleeting thrill? By the time I pulled over, I realized I wasn't just angry. I was hurt, devastated, and completely lost. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I needed to know just how far this went, because something about her story didn't add up, and I wasn't going to stop until I had the full truth. I spent most of the day driving aimlessly, trying to process everything. By the time I got home, it was dark. Emma was nowhere to be seen, probably holed up in the bedroom, avoiding me like she always did when things got uncomfortable. Fine by me. I needed time to figure out my next move. As I sat in the living room, staring at the pile of evidence I'd printed earlier, one question kept nagging at me. How deep does this go? The emails and receipts painted a picture of betrayal, sure, but something still didn't feel right. It was too rehearsed, too clean, like she'd been careful to hide the real dirt. I decided to keep digging. This time, I focused on her phone. Emma was predictable. She always used the same password for everything. Sure enough, her phone unlocked on the first try. At first glance, there wasn't much to see. Her texts with Jason were deleted, and her call log had been wiped. But then I found her hidden photo folder. And that's when everything started to fall apart. The folder was full of pictures, selfies of Emma and Jason, snapshots of them at restaurants, and even a few more intimate shots. I felt like I was going to be sick. But the photos weren't the worst part. No, the worst part was a series of screenshots from a group chat. A group chat she'd been actively participating in. The chat was called The Circle, a fitting name, given how small and incestuous their little world seemed to be. It wasn't just Emma and Jason. There were 4 other people in the group, all of them sharing stories, photos, and videos of their adventures, affairs, cheating, whatever you want to call it. It was a whole community of liars, egging each other on. I scrolled through the messages, each one more horrifying than the last. Jason, got the hotel booked for Saturday. Can't wait to see you again, winking face Emma. Me neither. David's so clueless, it's almost boring now. Clueless. Boring. That's what she thought of me. The man who worked overtime to pay our bills, who planned anniversary trips she'd never even intended to go on. And then there was the kicker, a video? It was from a few weeks ago, taken at some swanky hotel room I didn't recognize. Emma and Jason were there, along with 2 other couples. They were drinking, laughing, and, well, I'll spare you the details. Let's just say it was the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a bad reality TV show. Except it was real. My wife was in it. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. How could she do this to me? To us? I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, like I was falling into some endless pit of despair. But the more I watched, the more something else started to take root. Anger. Not just at Emma, but at Jason. At all of them. These people who thought they could trample over their commitments, their marriages, without a second thought. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. Not until I had more information. If this group chat was real, then there was more to uncover. I needed to know how long this had been going on, who else was involved, and just how far they were willing to go to cover their tracks. I transferred everything from her phone to mine. Messages, photos, videos, the works. I needed a record, something I could use if this all went south. And let's face it, it already had. As I sat there, staring at the pile of evidence I'd gathered, I realized something chilling. Emma wasn't just cheating. She was living a double life. And I had no idea who the woman I married really was. But one thing was clear. I wasn't done digging. Because this was no longer just about her betrayal. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. And I had a feeling things were about to get a whole lot uglier. The following morning, I barely slept. My mind was racing, my body running on pure adrenaline. Emma still avoided me like the plague, which suited me just fine. I didn't want to talk to her, not yet. Not until I had more answers. I started going through the messages from the circle again, piecing together their twisted little world. It wasn't just some casual group of cheaters. They had rules, schedules, and even inside jokes about their spouses. One of the messages caught my attention. Emma, David's working late tonight, so I'm free. What's the plan? Jason, dinner first, then back to my place. Unless someone wants to get creative? Another member chimed in. Can't wait to hear more of your clueless husband stories, Emma. You always crack me up. The humiliation burned like acid in my veins. Not only had she betrayed me, but she had made a joke of me, turned me into a punchline for her little circle of degenerates. My anger boiled over, but I forced myself to focus. I needed to stay sharp. I had a feeling there was more to uncover. And boy, was I right. Buried deep in the chat history was a conversation from months ago that made my blood run cold. Emma, Jason says he knows someone who can help. He's discreet, and it'll be fast. A fourth member replied, You sure about this? Divorce is messy. Better to just get what you need and move on. Jason, she's ready. Trust me. This guy knows what he's doing. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. Who were they talking about? And what exactly was the help they were looking for? Then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I opened my banking app and scrolled through the transactions. There it was, a large withdrawal from our joint account, made around the same time as that conversation. A withdrawal I hadn't authorized. My chest tightened as I realized what this meant. Emma had been planning to leave me. Not just leave me, ruin me. She and Jason had been working together to drain our finances. The money I had been saving for years, for our future, for a house, for the life I thought we were building together, was gone. Stolen. And now I had the receipts to prove it. The sheer audacity of it made my head spin. I thought back to all the times she'd smiled at me, kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me. All lies. All part of some elaborate con to bleed me dry before running off with her lover. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. This wasn't just infidelity. This was betrayal on a level I couldn't even comprehend. And the worst part? She was still pretending nothing was wrong. Still acting like I was the problem, like I was the one who had failed her. No, not anymore. By the time Emma finally emerged from the bedroom, I was ready. She walked into the kitchen, her face carefully neutral. Morning, she said, like everything was normal. Like she hadn't just ripped my life apart at the seams. I didn't respond. I just slid the stack of printed documents across the table toward her. She froze, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. What's this? She asked, her voice wavering. Evidence, I said coldly. Everything you've been hiding. The lies, the money, the affair. All of it. Her face went pale, but she quickly recovered, her expression hardening. You went through my phone, she snapped. That's a violation of my privacy. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Privacy? Don't talk to me about privacy, Emma. You gave that up the second you started lying to me. The second you joined that disgusting little group of yours. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't deny it. You don't understand, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. It's not as black and white as you think. Oh, it's black and white. All right, I shot back. You lied to me. You cheated on me. And you stole from me. What part of that am I not understanding? She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't done. I know about the money, Emma. I know you've been funneling it out of our account. Were you planning to tell me before or after you ran off with Jason? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. But instead, she doubled down. You left me no choice, she said, her voice cold. You've been so distant, so consumed with your work. I had to do something to take care of myself. Take care of yourself? I repeated, my voice rising. You mean screwing some guy behind my back and stealing the life savings I've been building for us? That's what you call taking care of yourself." She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at me with a mixture of defiance and guilt. It was infuriating. I wanted her to feel something. Remorse, shame, anything. But all I saw was a woman who had convinced herself she was the victim. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Emma tried to talk to me once more, but I shut her down. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, and honestly, I wasn't sure I ever would be. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because if Emma thought she could walk all over me and get away with it, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The morning after our confrontation, Emma acted like nothing had happened. She moved around the house, sipping her coffee, scrolling on her phone, and humming like she didn't have a care in the world. It made my skin crawl. I couldn't sit there and watch her pretend. I needed to do something. I grabbed my car keys and left without a word. If she noticed, she didn't show it. I drove to my bank and met with the manager. I explained the unauthorized withdrawals, providing the evidence I had printed out. The manager confirmed what I already knew. The transactions had been made using Emma's card. They flagged the account for fraud and froze it temporarily. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When I returned home, Emma was waiting for me in the living room. She looked irritated. "Where were you?" she asked, her tone accusatory. "Taking care of the mess you made," I said, my voice sharp. "The bank knows about the money, Emma. You can't touch a dime of it now." Her face went pale for a split second before she masked it with anger. "You froze our account? How am I supposed to pay for anything?" "That's not my problem," I said, walking past her. "Maybe ask Jason to cover your bills." She followed me into the kitchen, her voice rising. "You're being petty, David. This isn't how adults handle things." I slammed the counter with my fist, finally snapping. "You don't get to lecture me about being an adult, Emma. Not after what you've done. This is your fault, every bit of it." She stood there, glaring at me. But for once, she had nothing to say. I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there in silence. That night, I started packing my things. If she wanted this house so badly, she could have it, but I wasn't going to stick around and play the fool anymore. This was the beginning of the end. The next morning, I woke up to find Emma sitting at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands. For a moment, I thought she might finally show some remorse. But as soon as she looked up, I realized how wrong I was. "You froze the account?" she asked, her voice cold and sharp. "Do you know what you've done? You're ruining everything." "I'm ruining everything?" The audacity of her words sent a wave of anger crashing over me. "No, Emma," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You ruined everything the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. The moment you betrayed me." Her face twisted in frustration. "You don't understand, David." "No," I interrupted, slamming my hand on the table. "You don't get to play the victim here. I've done nothing but love you, support you, and trust you. And what did I get in return? Lies. Deceit. You turned our marriage into a joke?" She stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. "You think this is easy for me?" she snapped. "Do you know how miserable I've been? How trapped I've felt?" "Trapped?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You weren't trapped, Emma. You were selfish. You wanted the thrill of cheating without any of the consequences. Well, guess what? The consequences are here." She stared at me, her chest heaving with anger, but she didn't say a word. For once, she seemed to realize there was no way out of this. By the end of the day, I had finished packing my things. As I walked out the door with my suitcase, I turned to her one last time. "You made your choice, Emma. Now you can live with it." And with that, I left. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of the life I thought we were building together. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. Leaving the house felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but the pain of Emma's betrayal lingered. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, determined to rebuild my life. Every day was a battle to keep the memories at bay, the good ones and the bad. Emma texted me a few times in the days that followed. At first, she begged for forgiveness, claiming she'd made a mistake. But when I didn't respond, her tone shifted. She accused me of being dramatic, of overreacting. It was laughable, really. Overreacting? Freezing our account and leaving the house was the least I could do after what she'd done. I ignored her messages and focused on myself. Therapy helped, barely. My therapist told me to focus on my own healing. But how do you heal when your entire life feels like a lie? The anger simmered beneath the surface, but I refused to let it consume me. I had to move forward, no matter how hard it was. 3 months passed. I hadn't seen or spoken to Emma since the day I left, and I was starting to feel like myself again. That's when I got the call. It was from Jason's wife. Yes, you read that right, his wife. Her name was Lauren, and she'd found my number through some mutual acquaintances. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. We met at a coffee shop the next day. Lauren looked as shattered as I felt when I first discovered the truth. She told me how she'd uncovered Jason's affair with Emma and others. Apparently, Emma wasn't the only one he'd been making feel alive. As we talked, an idea began to form. It wasn't about revenge, it was about closure. Lauren and I decided to confront them together, to finally put an end to their web of lies. A week later, Lauren and I showed up at a restaurant where Emma and Jason were having dinner. The look on their faces when they saw us was priceless. Emma froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, while Jason tried to act casual, like we were just old friends dropping by. Lauren didn't waste any time. "I know everything, Jason," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "The lies, the cheating. You're disgusting." Emma tried to interject, but I cut her off. "Save it, Emma. You've done enough damage." The restaurant fell silent as we laid out everything. The emails, the photos, the stolen money. Jason turned red, while Emma stared at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. For the first time, I saw shame on her face. It didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. After that night, I blocked Emma's number. I didn't want to hear her apologies or excuses anymore. She tried to reach out through friends and even showed up at my apartment once, but I didn't let her in. Our divorce was finalized a few weeks later, and I made sure she got nothing from me. Lauren and I kept in touch for a while, sharing updates on how we were moving on. She filed for divorce from Jason, too, and was just as determined as I was to start fresh. It took time, but I started to heal. I focused on my career, picked up old hobbies, and even reconnected with friends I drifted away from during my marriage. For the first time in years, I felt free from lies, from manipulation, from the weight of a relationship that had long since stopped being real. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Emma's life fell apart after the divorce. Jason dumped her not long after our confrontation, and she ended up moving in with a friend. I didn't feel sorry for her. She made her choices, and now she had to live with them. As for me, I'm still rebuilding, but I'm stronger now. Sharing my story here has been part of that process, and I hope it helps someone else who's going through the same thing. Betrayal is devastating, but it doesn't define you. You can move on. You can heal. Thanks for listening, Reddit. This chapter of my life is finally closed, and I'm ready for whatever comes next.